It's high time we talked about Goosebumps on this channel, isn't it? You know that famous horror book series by R.L. Stine that's still going on to this very day? Yeah, that's right, it's multi-generational. Kids from the 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and 2020s and 2030s, 2040s, however long this is gonna go, will all have to beware because they're in for a scare. Unless you're an adult like me, then they're just kind of amusing. Sometimes, I mean, there are still books like Monster Blood 3, and let's face it, nobody wants to be like Monster Blood 3. But anyways, today I'm going to be talking about my favorite Goosebumps book of all time, and predictably, it's in the original series. Whenever you ask what somebody's favorite is, chances are they're going to say Night of the Living Dummy 1 or 2, One Day at Horrorland, A Night in Terror Tower, Stay Out of the Basement, which for the record is my number 2 pick, and of course the most popular book of them all, The Haunted Mask. I'm not saying these books are bad, far from it, they're everybody's favorites for a reason, they're some of the best in the entire run. However, my personal favorite is one that not a lot of people know about because, to be honest, Scholastic didn't really want you to know about it for some reason. We'll touch on that briefly at the end, but for now, let me introduce you to my favorite Goosebumps book of all time, I Live in Your Basement, which is not to be confused with Stay Out of the Basement, and it just now hit me, this isn't even in the script by the way, that my two favorite Goosebumps books have to do with the basement. Huh. Funny. Anyways, what is this book about? Boy, is that a difficult question to answer because this book is all over the place. Really? It's Inception before Inception was Inception. And it's for kids no less. This kid named Marco has a very overprotective mother that won't let him do anything. He can't play sports, he can't go running around places, he can't really do anything that's fun because he might hurt his fragile little body. He's not actually fragile, he just has a very paranoid mother. One day Marco sneaks off to play some softball and then gets hit in the head. And that is where everything falls apart. He starts getting these weird phone calls from this kid named Keith. Or at least we think he's a kid, more on that later. And Keith says that he lives in Marco's basement, and he wants Marco to come down and live with him to take care of him forever. But then every time he gets one of these calls or sees Keith in person, bam! He wakes up and it was all just a dream, and sometimes reality is slightly altered. For example, the school bully is now his sister when he wakes up, or some of the situations involving the softball game changed entirely. And this doesn't really happen until a third or halfway through the book. We just kind of see Marco recovering from his injury, and suddenly realizing that there might be some kind of suspicious thing going on in the basement. And then the story just melts and becomes completely insane. And I love it, love it, love it. The book is pretty cerebral and fairly complex for a children's book, I gotta say. You really have to think about what's going on and pay attention. This isn't really a skim read. If you skim through it, you're gonna have no idea what's going on. Heck, if you read through it normally, you'll still probably have no idea what's going on. The best comparison I can make to I Live in Your Basement is Coraline. You know, Coraline, the thing we've talked about twice here on this channel, has gotten us quite a bit of attention, let's just say. Coraline is a movie that leaves a lot up to the imagination and to the audience's interpretation. They'll answer some of the questions you have, but most everything is left up for you to decide, thereby making each individual person's experience with Coraline entirely different. I Live in Your Basement is the exact same way, although there aren't as many things to go over. Mainly, there's our villain, Keith, the guy who's presumably controlling this whole thing. This guy is something else. He's not some over-the-top pseudo-cartoon character like the Haunted Mask or Slappy the Dummy. He's this creepy pale kid who suddenly finds himself living in Marco's basement. And now he wants Marco to be his servant forever. Now I'm sure many of you out there are saying, that's exactly what Slappy the Dummy does, what makes Keith any different? Well, the difference is that Keith takes things a little bit further, and by little, I mean holy crap, how did Scholastic even allow this? So Keith just kind of stares at Marco a lot and talks to him in a really benign way. He gives off the kind of energy that makes you think that he knows he's already won. If something doesn't really go his way, he can change it with the blink of an eye. And then he vomits his guts all over the floor. Yeah, that's one of the big parts about this book. In fact, it's on the front cover right here. Good thing it's not pink or red, because otherwise everyone would know exactly what this is. But yes, this is a kid's organs. His stomach, his liver, and all those veins, just ugh. And this happens several times in the book, with great detail, I might add. Yeah, people thought that Night of the Living Dummy 1 was too scary for kids, but this one is just something else. And it's implied that Keith is the one that's causing Marco to have all these strange dreams or reality shifts or whatever they are. Because every time something doesn't go Keith's way, like I mentioned, things change. And they always seem to change in a way that benefits Keith. So here's my interpretation of this whole thing. Keith is a monster with all these strange abilities. Most notably, the ability to basically have a reset button, but every time the reset button is used, something around him changes. He can't really control what changes, but something most certainly does. So every time that Marco doesn't agree to take care of him, he resets, and he keeps hoping again and again that he's gonna get that one reality where Marco submits to Keith in the end and Keith ends up victorious. That doesn't exactly happen though, because he kinda gets what he wants, just not exactly. So in the end, it's stated that Keith was the one that got injured at the softball game and not Marco. Keith still is a monster that lives in the basement, and Marco lives upstairs like a normal person. But if you look closely at the dialogue, the way that they talk about Marco is that he's something to kinda be avoided. It almost makes it seem like he's the monster now. Meaning that it's entirely possible that Keith either duplicated or outright took Marco's family and turned them into monsters like him. Once again, open to your interpretation. You could just go with the simple, easy route of, oh, the whole thing was just a dream and Keith was actually an innocent person this whole time, but that's not exactly what the future Goosebumps books have to say. Despite the fact that I Live in Your Basement is one of the most obscure Goosebumps things ever, Keith still comes back from time to time, mostly in Goosebumps comics. And here he's seen as the bad guy with malicious intent. Not exactly the kind of innocent kid that gets hurt playing softball and then has to live in fear for the rest of his life. No, this is definitely somebody with something up his sleeve. Once again though, everybody's experience with I Live in Your Basement is entirely different. It's all up for you to decide. R.L. Stine wrote the book intentionally so that you have to use your imagination to connect the dots. So this is one of the few Goosebumps books that I think actually requires a second reading. The first time you're going through it and you're kind of getting the gist of the story, but then the second time through, you seem to understand a little bit more of the specific details or lack thereof. Only then will you really be able to understand what the heck is going on here. And don't worry, it is the shortest Goosebumps book of them all with only like 118 pages or so. But now let's talk about why exactly you haven't gotten to read this book, at least not likely. So, in the original 62 Goosebumps book lineup, there were a couple that just were not reprinted for whatever reason. These books were The Phantom of the Auditorium, Legend of the Lost Legend, I Live in Your Basement, Monster Blood 4, and Werewolf Skin. However, Phantom of the Auditorium and Legend of the Lost Legend would later be reprinted, although it would be many years later. These last three books, though, they are completely gone. They have not been reprinted since the original lineup, and there's no plans to ever bring them back, at least not as far as I could tell. Someday we'd like to make a video taking a look at all of these books, as well as The Girl Who Cried Monster, which has also now been out of print for the last few years, and trying to figure out why exactly they weren't reprinted, but that's not really the topic for today's video. We've got something else to discuss. Yes, I Live in Your Basement was not reprinted, even though it was right at the tail end of the Goosebumps original 62 lineup, which means that it didn't have a long time on the shelves, but I can kinda see why they might have done it. This book is not only extremely dark, but it's also extremely complex. Maybe a little too complex for young children's minds. I know a lot of teenagers and adults out there like to read Goosebumps to relive their childhood memories, but let me repeat the key word here. Childhood. Goosebumps is made for kids. Kids aren't always able to understand themes like existentialism, reality shifting, and body horror. Maybe this book didn't sell well, maybe it was because people were really confused at the time, I don't know, but for whatever reason, I Live in Your Basement, despite being an amazing book from the series, has been shoved into the background to be completely forgotten, only brought up on occasion for nostalgia's sake. And I think it deserves better than that. So if you want to track down a copy, go right ahead and try, but if you don't want to pay money for it, there's an audiobook I made a long time ago on our second channel, Spilled Milk Productions, that I think might help you out. There's a link in the description in case you want to check it out. And I highly recommend you do, because no matter what anyone says, I will always believe that I Live in Your Basement is the best Goosebumps book there is. And it's sad that not a lot of people have read it. Well, folks, thanks for watching the video. What'd you guys think? Did you ever read I Live in Your Basement? What's your favorite Goosebumps book? Comment below and let me know, because I'm always excited to hear what you guys have to say. Real quick, I'd like to thank our Patreon executive producers, Rezio, Leaf Razor, Sophie Burgers, Azarius, and Tanner Kapishki. If you two would like your name read at the end of every Media Mementos video, then consider donating to our Patreon, which has a link in the description below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time!